Bullets shattered the crystal chandelier, showering jagged glass over a child frozen in absolute terror. Panic paralyzed the room, except for a lowly housemaid who hurled her fragile body over the boy, absorbing 3 lethal shots. In that deafening silence, a ruthless syndicate boss found his future bride. To the casual observer, the Graham estate was a fortress of limestone and wrought iron nestled deep in the secluded hills of upstate New York. It was a monument to old money and dangerous power. To Coralie Jenkins, it was merely an escape. At 24, Coralie had spent her entire adult life running from a shadow-filled past, seeking refuge in the anonymity of a maid's uniform. She scrubbed marble floors, polished antique silverware, and kept her eyes firmly pinned to the ground. In the house of Arlo Graham, invisibility was the greatest survival mechanism one could possess. Arlo was not merely a wealthy businessman. He was the undisputed architect of the city's underground empire. Broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, and possessing eyes as cold and unforgiving as the Atlantic in winter, Arlo ruled his syndicate with an iron fist. He was a widower whose heart had allegedly died the same day his late wife's car was blown off a bridge 5 years prior. Since then, the estate had been devoid of warmth, laughter, or any semblance of a normal home. The only innocent soul trapped in this gilded cage was Theo, Arlo's 6-year-old son. Theo was a quiet, profoundly lonely child. His father was a phantom, always locked in his mahogany-paneled study with gruff men like Lorenzo Bianchi, his second-in-command, plotting hostile takeovers and territorial defense against their bitter rivals, the Castle family. The nannies quit frequently, terrified of the armed guards and the oppressive atmosphere. Consequently, Theo was often left to wander the cavernous halls alone, a tiny ghost in a house of giants. Coralie noticed him first on a rainy Tuesday. She had been polishing the grand staircase banister when she heard a soft, muffled sobbing coming from the coat closet beneath the stairs. Abandoning her rags, she carefully opened the heavy oak door. There, curled in a ball among the cashmere overcoats, was the heir to the Graham empire, trembling in the dark. "Hey," Coralie had whispered softly, crouching down to his eye level. She didn't use the formal Master Theo that was strictly required. She just spoke to him like a human being. "Thunder is pretty scary, isn't it? It sounds like the sky is bowling." Theo had peeked through his fingers, his large, tear-filled brown eyes studying her face. Coralie wasn't glamorous. She had messy auburn hair tied in a practical bun, a smattering of freckles across her nose, and hands roughened by bleach and hot water. But her smile was the first genuine thing Theo had seen in months. "It's too loud," the boy whispered. "Tell you what," Coralie said, reaching into her apron pocket and pulling out a slightly squished butterscotch candy. "If you come out to the kitchen, I'll make you the best hot chocolate you've ever had. We can put so many marshmallows in it that the thunder won't even be able to find it." That single, quiet interaction forged an unbreakable, secret bond. Over the next 6 months, Coralie became the center of Theo's hidden universe. While the rest of the staff cowered, Coralie would sneak into the boy's sprawling, toy-filled bedroom after her shift to read him stories of dragons and knights. She patched up his scraped knees when he fell in the gardens, shushing him gently before his strict tutors could scold him. She loved the boy with a fierce, quiet intensity, recognizing in him the same profound loneliness she harbored in her own chest. Arlo, of course, was oblivious. He was too consumed by the escalating war with Victor Cassel. Cassel was a mad dog, a rival boss who cared nothing for the old rules of the syndicate. Cassel targeted families, burned businesses to the ground, and had recently sworn to end the Graham bloodline entirely. The tension in the estate was palpable. Guards with automatic weapons patrolled the perimeter 24 hours a day. The staff walked on eggshells, terrified that a dropped plate might sound like a gunshot. One evening, Coralie was in the library, replacing a stack of leather-bound books, when Arlo unexpectedly walked in. Coralie froze, pressing her back against the towering shelves. Arlo didn't even look at her. He poured himself a glass of amber liquid from the crystal decanter, his face etched with exhaustion and dark, violent thoughts. Suddenly, a small figure darted into the room. Theo, clutching a broken wooden toy airplane, ran straight past his father and slammed into Coralie's legs. "Coralie, it broke," Theo cried, holding up the splintered wood, entirely ignoring the towering, terrifying figure of the syndicate boss standing just feet away. The temperature in the room plummeted. Arlo turned slowly, The glass of whiskey paused halfway to his lips. His dark eyes locked onto the maid, narrowing in sharp assessment. Coralie felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She was supposed to reprimand the boy, remind him of his place, and bow her head. Instead, her protective instincts flared. She knelt smoothly, taking the broken toy from the boy's trembling hands. "It's okay, buddy. We can fix this with some wood glue. Let's go to the kitchen." She deliberately placed herself between the child and his father, shielding Theo from Arlo's intense, penetrating stare. Arlo watched them in heavy silence. He saw the way his son clung to the fabric of the maid's cheap uniform. He saw the way the maid didn't flinch away from his gaze, her chin tilted up just a fraction of an inch in silent defiance. For a fleeting second, something unrecognizable flickered in Arlo's cold eyes. "Fix it," Arlo commanded, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "And Jenkins?" Coralie paused at the threshold, clutching Theo's hand. "Yes, sir?" "Ensure he is in bed by 8. It was a dismissal, but it was also an acknowledgement. From that day on, Arlo Graham began to notice the invisible wallflower. He noticed the way the estate felt a fraction warmer when she was in the room. He noticed the sound of his son's rare laughter echoing from the servants' quarters. But in the violent world of the Mafia, noticing something beautiful usually meant it was about to be destroyed. The annual Founders Gala was the one public event Arlo Graham could not avoid. Held at the sprawling glass-domed city conservatory, it was a gathering of the city's elite politicians, judges, and businessmen whose pockets were lined with Graham money. It was a place to be seen, to project an image of untouchable power and legitimate wealth. Arlo had decreed that Theo must attend to maintain the facade of a stable, thriving family. Because Theo was terrified of the crowds and the flashing cameras, Arlo ordered Coralie to attend as the boy's dedicated handler. Dressed in a simple, modest black dress that starkly contrasted with the glittering jewels and haute couture of the mob wives, Coralie felt entirely out of place. Her only anchor was the small, sweaty hand gripping hers tightly. The conservatory was a tropical paradise of rare orchids, towering palm trees, and cascading waterfalls, all enclosed in a magnificent glass structure. String quartets played softly in the background, and champagne flowed like water. Arlo stood at the center of the room, radiating dangerous authority, surrounded by his lieutenants. He periodically glanced over at Coralie and Theo, who were tucked away near a large display of lilies. "Are you okay, Theo?" Coralie whispered, kneeling to adjust the boy's miniature tuxedo bow tie. Theo nodded bravely, though his face was pale. "Can we go home soon, Coralie?" "Very soon, sweetie. Just a little longer." Coralie stood up, her eyes scanning the room. She was used to looking for dirt, for things out of place. It was a habit born of her profession. That was why she noticed the caterers. There were 3 men near the service entrance, carrying silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, but their posture was wrong. They were too stiff, their eyes darting nervously around the room, entirely ignoring the guests they were supposed to be serving. One of the men reached beneath his crisp, white apron. The silver tray dropped to the marble floor with a resounding, echoing crash. Time slowed to a devastating crawl. Instead of a bottle of champagne, the man pulled out a compact, suppressed submachine gun. Across the room, 2 more guests ripped weapons from underneath their tailored jackets. "Castle!" someone screamed, right before the glass dome above them began to shatter under a hail of gunfire. Chaos erupted in a terrifying wave of sound and motion. Screams ripped through the air, harmonizing with the staccato popping of automatic fire. Wealthy socialites dove behind delicate flower displays, their silk dresses tearing on thorns. Arlo's men drew their weapons instantly, returning fire, but the ambush had been perfectly timed. Castle's assassins had infiltrated the inner perimeter. Coralie didn't think. Instinct, forged in the fires of a maternal love she hadn't known she possessed, took complete control. One of the assassins, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, locked eyes with Arlo across the room. But he didn't aim at the boss. Cassell's orders were clear: end the bloodline. The assassin pivoted, the cold steel of his weapon leveling directly at the small boy standing frozen in his tuxedo. "Theo!" Arlo roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony tearing from his throat. He was too far away. He was blocked by a surging tide of panicked bodies. The untouchable king of the city was entirely powerless to save his only son. Coralie moved faster than thought. She didn't dive for cover. She dove forward. She hit Theo with the full force of her body, tackling him to the hard marble floor just as the assassin squeezed the trigger. She wrapped her arms around the boy, curling her body into a protective shell over him, turning her own back to the shooter. Thwack. The first bullet tore through Corley's left shoulder, the kinetic energy slamming her harder against the floor. A gasp of absolute agony escaped her lips, but she didn't loosen her grip on the child beneath her. Thwack. The second bullet hit her lower back, a searing white-hot poker of pain that instantly made her legs go numb. She could feel Theo crying beneath her, his small hands clutching her dress. "Don't look, baby, don't look," she thought, though she couldn't find the breath to speak. Thwack. The third bullet struck her side, glancing off a rib and tearing through her abdomen. Blood, thick and alarmingly hot, blossomed instantly, soaking through her cheap black dress and pooling onto the pristine white marble. The world began to tilt, the edges of her vision blurring into dark, fuzzy static. Across the room, Arlo moved like a demon unleashed from hell. He vaulted over a decorative fountain, his own weapon drawn. He didn't bother with suppressive fire. He aimed with lethal, terrifying precision. 2 shots rang out from his gun, hitting the scarred assassin directly in the forehead. The man crumpled instantly. Lorenzo and the other guards systematically dismantled the remaining threats. The brief, violently bloody skirmish over in less than 60 seconds. Silence fell over the conservatory, broken only by the whimpers of the guests and the sound of water trickling from the shattered fountains. Arlo dropped his gun, his polished shoes slipping in the puddles of champagne and blood as he sprinted toward the display of lilies. His heart, a muscle he had long thought turned to stone, hammered frantically against his ribs. He fell to his knees beside the crumpled pile of black fabric. "Theo," Arlo choked out, his hands shaking as he reached out. Slowly, agonizingly, Corley shifted. She rolled off the boy, her face ashen, her breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Beneath her, Theo was completely unharmed, though his face was smeared with Coralie's blood. "Papa!" Theo shrieked, scrambling up and launching himself into his father's arms. Arlo caught his son, burying his face in the boy's hair, a profound shudder racking his massive frame. He pulled back, checking the boy frantically, finding not a single scratch. He then looked down at the woman, bleeding out on the floor. Coralie was staring at the shattered glass dome above, her eyes hazy. Her blood was spreading across the floor, painting the white lilies red. She had taken 3 rounds at point-blank range. Bullets meant for his blood, bullets meant to break him. "Keep pressure on those wounds," Arlo bellowed, the mob boss returning to the forefront. "Get the cars, call Harrison, tell him to prep the surgical suite now." Lorenzo dropped beside Coralie, ripping off his expensive suit jacket and pressing it violently against her abdomen. Coralie gasped in pain, her eyes rolling back. Arlo leaned over her, his shadow blocking out the harsh light. He grabbed her blood-slicked hand, squeezing it with an intensity that surprised them both. "You hold on, Jenkins. Do you hear me? You do not have permission to die. You hold on." Coralie's lips parted, a faint, bloody smile touching the corners of her mouth. He's safe," she whispered before her eyes fluttered shut and her body went entirely limp in the chaos. For 5 days, the private, underground medical facility beneath the Graham estate felt like a tomb. Dr. Harrison, a brilliant trauma surgeon, struck off the medical register years ago for a gambling debt Arlo had forgiven in exchange for lifetime servitude, had operated on Coralie for 11 grueling hours. He extracted the bullet from her shoulder, repaired the shattered bone, stopped the massive internal bleeding in her abdomen, and managed to fuse the cracked vertebra in her lower back. "She lost a catastrophic amount of blood, Arlo," Dr. Harrison had said, peeling off his bloody gloves. "The physical damage is repaired, but whether she wakes up, that's up to her." Arlo did not leave the subterranean wing. He moved his command center to the sterile hallway outside her room. He conducted brutal, retaliatory business over a burner phone, ordering the systematic dismantling of Victor Cassel's supply chains and safe houses, while staring through the reinforced glass window at the woman hooked up to a ventilator. He was a man obsessed. In his world, loyalty was a commodity bought with cash, enforced by fear, and always subject to change if a better offer came along. The women he had known were either calculated social climbers or terrified victims. He had never witnessed a pure, unadulterated act of self-sacrifice. This maid, this nobody who possessed nothing in the world, had thrown away her life to protect his legacy. Theo spent hours sitting by her bed, reading the same storybooks Coralie had read to him, crying softly into her uninjured hand. Arlo watched his son's grief, and a cold, heavy realization settled into his bones. If Coralie died, Theo would shatter. If Coralie lived, she would be a target for the rest of her life. Castle would know she saved the heir. He would torture her just to send a message. Furthermore, Arlo realized with a jolt of possessive clarity he could never let her go. She had bled for his family. She had earned a place at the table that no lieutenant ever could. But a maid could not be protected with the full might of the Graham Empire without raising questions, without showing a vulnerability that rivals would exploit. There was only one way to make her untouchable. Only one rank in the syndicate that commanded absolute, unquestioning respect and commanded the full deployment of his private army. On the evening of the 5th day, the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the ventilator shifted. Behind the glass, Coralie's fingers twitched, her brow furrowed in pain, and slowly, heavily, her eyelids fluttered open. Arlo was through the door in seconds, pushing past a startled nurse. Coralie blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, the world swimming into focus. Her entire body felt encased in lead and fire. She tried to speak, but the breathing tube choked her. She panicked, her heart monitor spiking violently. "Shh! Don't fight it," a deep, rough voice commanded. Arlo leaned over her, his large hands gently but firmly pinning her uninjured arm to the bed to stop her from pulling at the tubes. Dr. Harrison rushed in, quickly and efficiently removing the ventilator tube. Coralie coughed violently, her throat raw and burning. She slumped back onto the pillows, gasping for air. She looked up, finding Arlo Graham standing over her. He looked terrifying. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and he wore a crumpled dress shirt stained with dried blood. Her blood. "Theo?" Coralie croaked, the single word feeling like swallowing broken glass. "He is unharmed. He is sleeping upstairs," Arlo replied, his voice devoid of its usual icy command. It was thick with something else. Reverence. Because of you. Coralie closed her eyes in overwhelming relief. "Good. You took 3 bullets meant for my son, Coralie." It was the first time he had ever used her first name. It sounded heavy on his tongue. "Why?" Coralie opened her eyes, meeting the gaze of the most dangerous man in the city, without a sliver of fear. "He was scared," she whispered simply. "He's just a little boy. Nobody else was looking out for him." The words hit Arlo like a physical blow. Nobody else. An indictment of his own failures as a father. "I owe you a life debt," Arlo stated, pacing the small room like a caged panther. "In my world, debts of blood must be repaid in kind. Castle knows what you did. He has spies everywhere. The moment you leave this estate, you are a dead woman." Coralie's heart rate hitched on the monitor. "What are you saying?" Arlo stopped at the foot of her bed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He flipped it open. Inside rested a massive, flawless emerald-cut diamond flanked by 2 dark sapphires, set in a band of dark platinum. It wasn't a delicate piece of jewelry. It looked like a piece of armor. "I cannot protect a maid with the full force of my syndicate," Arlo said coldly, though his eyes burned with fierce intensity. "It would show weakness. It would show attachment where there should be none. But I can protect my wife." Coralie stared at the ring, her brain struggling to process the words through the haze of painkillers. You want to marry me? I'm your housekeeper. I scrub your toilets." "You are the woman who bled for my blood," Arlo corrected fiercely, stepping closer. "You are the mother my son chose. You will never scrub a floor again. You will wear my name like a shield. Anyone who looks at you sideways will lose their eyes. You will be the untouchable queen of this city." "This is insane," Coralie breathed, trying to push herself up and crying out as her fused spine protested violently. "You don't love me. I don't love you. This is a mafia arrangement." "This is survival," Arlo countered, leaning in close, his scent of cedar and gunpowder wrapping around her. "It is a tactical alliance. But understand this, Coralie. I do not share what is mine. If you take this ring, you are a Graham until the day you die. There is no divorce. There is no walking away. You bind yourself to the darkness to stay in the light with my son." Coralie looked into his eyes. She saw the ruthlessness, yes, but she also saw desperation. A man terrified of losing the only piece of his soul left in the world. And she thought of Theo. If she refused, she would be sent away with a fat bank account, always looking over her shoulder, never seeing the boy again. Theo would be left alone in the dark closet, crying while the thunder rolled. Can I still read to him?" she whispered, a tear slipping down her pale cheek. Arlo's harsh expression broke for a fraction of a second. He reached out, his rough thumb gently wiping the tear away. "You can do whatever you damn well please. You will be the lady of the house." "Then do it," Coralie said, her voice shaking but her resolve absolute. Arlo didn't hesitate. He turned to the door and barked a command. A moment later, Lorenzo stepped into the room, followed by a pale, terrified-looking man in a suit clutching a legal binder, and a Catholic priest looking equally sweating and nervous. Right there, amid the beep of heart monitors and the smell of antiseptic, Arlo Graham took Coralie Jenkins's battered, bruised hand. He slid the heavy diamond onto her finger, a physical weight that anchored her to the underworld. "I, Arlo, take you, Coralie," he recited, his eyes never leaving hers, binding them in an ancient, unbreakable contract of blood, survival, and a terrifying new reality. The maid who had scrubbed the floors had died on the marble of the conservatory. The woman who woke up was the wife of the mob boss, and the city was about to burn for what they had done to her. Weeks melted into a grueling, agonizing blur of physical therapy and quiet terror. Coralie's body slowly knit itself back together beneath the sheer, unyielding willpower of the man who now called her his wife. Arlo Graham transformed the sprawling east wing of the estate into a fortress of luxury and medical necessity. Coralie traded her rough cotton aprons for silk robes and cashmere, but the transition was far more psychological than physical. She was no longer the invisible wallflower. She was Mrs. Arlo Graham. Staff members who once barked orders at her now bowed their heads when she passed, their eyes wide with a mixture of reverence and absolute fear. Mrs. Gable, the harsh head housekeeper who had once docked Coralie's pay for a dusty baseboard, trembled so violently while serving Coralie tea that the china rattled uncontrollably. "You don't need to fear me, Mrs. Gable," Coralie had said softly one afternoon, her fingers tracing the heavy platinum and diamond ring that felt like a shackle on her left hand. "I fear him, ma'am," the older woman whispered back, not daring to look up, "and what he would do to anyone who disrespects you." Arlo was a man of his word. He showered Coralie with unimaginable wealth, opening bank accounts in her name that held more money than she could spend in a dozen lifetimes. Yet, the emotional distance between them remained a vast, frozen ocean. Arlo slept in the master suite down the hall. Their interactions were strictly polite, highly tactical discussions about security protocols and Theo's homeschooling schedule. However, Arlo's cold eyes constantly tracked her movements. He was a dragon guarding his most prized treasure, fiercely protective but entirely incapable of showing tenderness. Theo, conversely, blossomed. The boy was no longer a ghost haunting the corridors. He ran freely through the estate, knowing his new mama was always there. Coralie's physical scars pulled and ached when she lifted him, but she endured the pain silently, entirely devoted to the child whose life she had bought with her own blood. The fragile peace, however, was merely an illusion masking a brewing storm. Victor Cassel had gone utterly feral after the failed assassination attempt. His business operations were bleeding money due to Arlo's relentless retaliatory strikes, and Cassel was desperate to land a fatal blow. Because Coralie was a creature born of invisibility, she retained her old habits. She still moved without making a sound. She still knew the acoustic anomalies of the sprawling manor, how a voice carrying from the east drawing room could be heard perfectly clearly in the adjacent dumbwaiter shaft. That was how she discovered the betrayal. It was a Tuesday night. A violent thunderstorm raged outside, a harsh echo of the day Coralie and Theo had first bonded. Unable to sleep due to the deep ache in her fused spine, Coralie had wrapped herself in a heavy velvet robe and wandered down to the kitchens for warm milk. As she passed the dark, narrow hallway leading to the servants' quarters, she heard a voice, low, urgent, familiar. It was Vincent, Arlo's cousin and one of his most trusted capos. Vincent oversaw the estate's external security perimeter. Coralie pressed her back against the cold limestone wall, holding her breath. I told you, Victor. The guards shift at 0300 hours, Vincent hissed into a burner phone. There's a 5-minute blind spot on the Northgate cameras while the system recalibrates. That's your window. Arlo is leading a strike team downtown tomorrow night. He won't be here. It's just the woman, the kid, and Lorenzo's skeleton crew. A cold sweat broke out across Coralie's forehead. A mole, the highest level of treason. Vincent was selling them out to Cassell. Just make it quick, Vincent muttered, his voice trembling slightly. Burn the West Wing if you have to, but I want my money wired to the Cayman account by morning. Coralie didn't wait to hear more. She silently retreated, her bare feet making zero sound on the Persian runners. She bypassed her own room and went straight to Arlo's heavy mahogany doors. She didn't knock. She threw the doors open. Arlo was awake, sitting at a desk with a glass of scotch, a disassembled Sig Sauer pistol laid out on an oilcloth before him. He snapped his head up, his hand immediately dropping to a secondary weapon hidden beneath the desk. "Coralie?" he growled, seeing her pale face and wide eyes. "What is it? Are you hurt?" "You're being betrayed," she breathed, locking the door behind her and rushing to his desk. "Vincent! I just heard him on a burner phone talking to Castle." Arlo froze, a terrifying stillness settling over his broad shoulders. "Vincent is my blood. He's been with me for 20 years. Are you certain?" He told Castle about the 0300 camera recalibration on the North Gate, Coralie stated, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "He said you were going downtown tomorrow night. He sold out the estate, Arlo. He sold out Theo." The mention of his son's name was the catalyst. The cold, calculated boss vanished, replaced by an apex predator. Arlo didn't argue. He didn't ask her if she might have misheard. He looked into his wife's eyes and saw absolute, unvarnished truth. "Lorenzo," Arlo barked into an intercom on his desk. "My office. Now." Within 5 minutes, Lorenzo Bianchi stood in the room, absorbing the information. "If this is true, boss, we're sitting ducks tomorrow," Lorenzo said grimly. "We don't change the plan," Arlo stated, his voice a lethal whisper. "I still go downtown. We let Vincent think his trap is set. We let Castle's men breach the perimeter. But we turn their own ambush into a slaughterhouse." Arlo stood up, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of Coralie. He reached out, his rough hands gripping her shoulders. For the first time, she felt a tremor in his fingers. "You did well, Mia Regina," he murmured, his dark eyes burning into hers. "You may have just saved our lives again." He leaned down, and for the first time since he had forced his ring onto her finger, Arlo Graham kissed his wife. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a branding. It tasted of scotch, danger, and a desperate, possessive fury. Coralie gasped, her hands instinctively clutching the lapels of his silk robe as a startling heat flared deep in her stomach. When he pulled away, his chest was heaving. "Lorenzo, arm the men. Tomorrow night we end Victor Castle." The following night hung heavy with impending violence. Arlo and his primary strike team had departed in a fleet of black SUVs, leaving the estate ostensibly vulnerable. Vincent paced nervously in the main foyer, entirely unaware that Lorenzo's loyalists were already positioned in the shadows, waiting for his betrayal to unfold. Deep within the subterranean levels of the estate, Coralie sat in a reinforced safe room. Theo was asleep on a cot, exhausted from playing, a pair of noise-canceling headphones securely over his ears. Coralie did not wear silk tonight. She wore dark tactical trousers and a fitted black turtleneck. A 9mm Glock rested heavily against her thigh in a leather holster. Lorenzo had given her a crash course in firearms over the past few weeks, acknowledging that the boss's wife could no longer afford to be defenseless. At exactly 0300 hours, the estate's power grid abruptly surged and went dark. The backup generators immediately kicked in, casting the hallways in eerie, red emergency lighting. The siege had begun. Above ground, the quiet night shattered. Suppressed gunfire spat through the darkness as Cassell's elite mercenaries poured through the compromised North Gate. But instead of sleeping guards, they were met with a wall of lead. Lorenzo's men unleashed hell from the upper balconies, utilizing heavy machine guns and flashbang grenades. The courtyard instantly turned into a chaotic meat grinder. Vincent, realizing his plan had been anticipated, panicked. He drew his weapon and sprinted down the hallway toward the basement access, desperate to use Coralie and Theo as hostages to buy his way out. Down in the safe room, Coralie watched the security monitors flicker and die as the cameras were systematically shot out. The heavy steel door of the safe room shuddered under a massive impact. Someone was trying to blow the hinges. Coralie, Vincent's muffled, panicked voice echoed through the steel. "Open the door! Arlo is dead! We have to get Theo out of here!" Coralie's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind was terrifyingly clear. She recognized a rat when she heard one. She walked to the keypad beside the door, overriding the electronic lock, and stepped back into the shadows, raising the heavy Glock with both hands, just as Lorenzo had taught her. The steel door hissed open. Vincent lunged into the room, his gun raised, his eyes wild and desperate. He saw the sleeping boy, but before he could take a step toward the cot, a cold voice stopped him dead in his tracks. "Drop it, Vincent." Vincent froze, slowly turning his head to see the former maid standing in the corner, the barrel of her weapon perfectly aligned with the center of his chest. "Coralie," Vincent choked out, forcing a placating smile. "You don't understand. I'm trying to." "I know exactly what you're trying to do," Coralie interrupted, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I heard you on the phone. You sold us to Castle." Vincent's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You're a maid playing dress-up. You don't have the stomach to pull that trigger. You're soft. You're—" Bang! The deafening roar of the gunshot echoed in the small concrete room. Coralie didn't flinch. The recoil jolted her arms, sending a spike of pain through her healing shoulder, but her stance remained perfect. Vincent stumbled backward, a blossoming red stain spreading across his expensive suit jacket. He looked down at his chest in absolute shock, his weapon clattering to the floor before his knees buckled. He collapsed in a heap, gasping his final breaths on the cold concrete. Coralie lowered the weapon slowly. She looked at her trembling hands. She had taken a life. The invisible wallflower was truly dead, buried beneath the fierce, protective instincts of a syndicate queen. She walked over to Theo, adjusting his headphones to ensure he remained asleep, and stood guard over him like an avenging angel. Meanwhile, miles away at a deserted shipping yard, Arlo Graham stood victorious amidst the burning wreckage of Victor Cassell's empire. The ambush had been a complete success. Cassell knelt in the rain-slicked concrete, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds, staring up at Arlo with pure hatred. "You think you've won, Graham?" Cassell coughed, blood spilling from his lips. "My men are at your house. Your new bride and your bastard kid are dead meat." Arlo didn't bother with a witty retort. He simply raised his weapon and put a single bullet between Cassell's eyes, silencing the mad dog forever. "Lorenzo," Arlo barked into his earpiece, his voice tight with an underlying terror he refused to acknowledge. "Status." "Estate is secure, boss." Lorenzo's voice crackled through the comms, heavy with exhaustion but alive. "Cassell's men are wiped out. We lost 4, but the perimeter is holding." "My wife?" Arlo demanded, sprinting toward his armored SUV. "She's in the bunker." "Boss, Vincent was the mole. He made a run for the safe room." Arlo's heart stopped. And your wife handled it?" Lorenzo said, a note of profound respect coloring his rough voice. "Vincent is dead. She put one right through his heart." When Arlo finally arrived back at the estate, the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long gray shadows over the bullet-riddled courtyard. He didn't stop to assess the damage. He ignored the cleanup crews bagging bodies. He ran down the subterranean stairs, taking them 3 at a time. He burst into the safe room. Coralie was sitting on the edge of the cot, gently stroking Theo's hair as the boy slowly woke up. The Glock sat on the table beside her, the barrel still smelling faintly of cordite. Vincent's body had already been dragged away by Lorenzo's men, leaving only a dark, smeared stain on the floor. Arlo stopped in the doorway, his chest heaving, his dark clothes soaked in rain and blood. He looked at the woman sitting there, no longer a victim, no longer a maid, but a hardened survivor who had looked the devil in the eye and pulled the trigger to protect what was hers. "Coralie," Arlo whispered, the word tearing from his throat. She looked up, her eyes softening as she saw him. "You came back." Arlo crossed the room in 2 massive strides. He dropped to his knees before her, burying his face in her lap, wrapping his massive arms tightly around her waist. It was an act of complete, absolute submission from a man who bowed to no one. He shook silently, the adrenaline and terror finally breaking his iron composure. "I will always come back," Arlo swore fiercely, looking up at her, his dark eyes shining with raw, unfiltered emotion. "You are my heart, Coralie. You are my soul. If I had lost you tonight, I would have burned the entire world to ash." Coralie reached down, her small hands tangling in his dark, wet hair. The marriage of convenience, forged in blood and survival, had fundamentally shifted. In the crucible of violence, a terrifying, beautiful, and completely indestructible love had been forged. "We are safe, Arlo," she murmured, leaning down to press her lips to his forehead. "We are all safe." From that day forward, the Graham Empire ruled the city undisputed, but everyone in the underworld knew a new truth. You could attempt to negotiate with Arlo Graham, and you might survive. But if you ever threatened Theo, or crossed the invisible wallflower who had become the queen of the syndicate, there would be no negotiations. There would only be the fire, and Coralie Graham would be the one holding the match. Did this mafia romance leave you breathless? If you loved the intense twists, unbreakable loyalty, and Coralie's transformation into a fearless syndicate queen, hit that like button. Share this incredible true crime-inspired story with friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling audio dramas. Drop a comment below. Would you have taken those bullets for a child? See you in the next thrilling video.